She called it a joke, but the way she looked at me when she said, "Where would that be, really?" It didn't feel like one. I said it half laughing, half exhausted, "I think I need a timeout." It was one of those long evenings that blurred into night, the air thick with that quiet kind of tired you only feel when you've been around someone too long and can't quite leave. The office lights had dimmed, leaving streaks of amber from the desk lamp cutting across her face. She looked up from the papers, eyes slow and calm, a small curve forming at the corner of her lips. "Where would that be, really?" she asked. It wasn't the words that caught me, it was the way she said them. Soft. Drawn out. Like she was inviting me to think about what I just said instead of answering too quickly. Her tone was half amusement, half something else, something I couldn't name but felt in the space between us. I smiled back, pretending to focus on my notes. But my pulse shifted, just slightly. I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioner, the rustle of paper when she leaned back in her chair. Everything suddenly felt too alive. She was older, the kind of woman who carried time gracefully, like it never had to be explained. Her movements were slow but sure, and her silences never begged to be filled. That was what drew me in first, not her beauty, though it was impossible to ignore, but the way she made stillness feel comfortable. "You wouldn't last 5 minutes in a real timeout," she said finally, eyes meeting mine again. Her smirk deepened, playful but measured. I tried to match her tone. "Depends who's keeping me there." For a second, the air seemed to still. A flicker, like the kind of pause where something unspoken hovers too close to the surface. Then she looked away, and the moment folded back into normal. But the echo of it stayed. She gathered her papers slowly, the silver of her bracelet catching the light as she moved. I watched, not meaning to, but unable to stop. The faint scent of her perfume, something light, floral, and warm, drifted across the desk when she passed by. I don't think she noticed how I lingered on that moment, but maybe she did. There was a calm awareness in her, the kind that comes from knowing more than she says. She didn't rush to leave, even when her bag was ready. Instead, she leaned against the table, looking at me like she was still waiting for an answer. "So," she said quietly, "where would your timeout be?" I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Because it wasn't really a question about a place. It felt like she was asking if I even knew what I wanted a break from. And when she finally walked past me toward the door, her shoulder brushed mine, light, unintentional, but enough to make me forget every clever response I'd been planning. That was the first time I realized, this wasn't just banter anymore. Something had shifted, quietly but completely. The next few days slipped by in that odd rhythm we'd fallen into, casual hellos, shared silences, and conversations that started nowhere but never felt small. She always spoke in calm, measured tones, but her words stayed with me long after. We weren't supposed to talk much outside work, yet somehow it happened, in the hallway, near the coffee machine, by the window that caught the afternoon light. I'd find her there, cup in hand, eyes distant. Sometimes she'd notice me first and smile like she'd been expecting me. "You survived without a timeout," she teased one morning. "Barely," I said. "Still recovering." She laughed quietly, that warm, low sound that always seemed to reach me before her words did. There was something comforting about how she carried humor, not loud or sharp, but thoughtful, like she'd let you in on a secret without saying so. We talked about things that shouldn't have mattered, her favorite books, the cafe she went to on weekends, the plant in her office she swore was dying of neglect and honesty. I started noticing the details she left unspoken, how her smile faded a little too quickly, how her fingers brushed the edge of her mug when she talked about time. Sometimes, she'd pause mid-conversation, eyes flicking up at me, and in that half-second silence, I'd feel it again, that quiet, electric awareness between us. One afternoon, as I reached across her desk to hand her a folder, our hands almost touched. Almost. Her fingertips grazed the edge of mine, a light, passing contact, but it was enough. My throat tightened for reasons I couldn't name. She didn't pull back right away, and neither did I. Careful, she said softly. You'll start thinking I'm doing that on purpose. The words hit like a spark, playful, but layered. There was a knowing glint in her eyes, but she turned back to her notes before I could answer. That evening, I stayed late again, though I had no real reason to. She worked quietly beside me, the sound of her pen moving across paper steady and soothing. Every now and then, she'd hum, not a song I recognized, just something soft enough to feel like it belonged to the room. I remember looking at her hands as she wrote, the slight curve of her wrist, the rhythm of her movements, the calm in every gesture. I wondered how someone could make something as ordinary as writing feel intimate. When she finally stood to leave, she gave me that same small smirk as before. You think too much, she said. Only when I'm around you. She paused by the door, her hand resting on the frame. For a moment, she didn't look back, just smiled to herself, like she'd heard exactly what she needed to. And then she was gone, leaving behind a faint scent of jasmine, and a silence that somehow felt full. Rain had started to fall that afternoon, the kind that softens the world until everything feels slower. The office was quiet, most people had already left, leaving behind the hum of computers and the rhythmic tap of rain against the glass. She was still there, sitting by the window with her cup of tea, staring at something far beyond the parking lot. I hesitated before walking in. She didn't turn when I did, just said softly, "You always stay late." "So do you," I said. Her smile was faint, distracted. "Maybe we both have nowhere better to be." Something in her tone felt different. Not sad exactly, but open in a way I hadn't heard before. She gestured for me to sit, and I did, across from her this time, close enough to hear the quiet sound of her breathing over the rain. She took a sip of tea, then set the cup down carefully. "You know," she said, "people always assume I like being alone. They don't realize it's just easier that way." Her voice was even, but her eyes didn't match it. They carried a tired kind of truth, the kind that doesn't ask for sympathy. I didn't say anything, I just waited. She glanced toward the rain again. "I used to be married," she said after a moment. "We were good together for a while. But I think we wanted different kinds of peace." I watched her fingers trace the rim of her cup, slow and absent. "What kind of peace?" I asked quietly. "The kind that doesn't make you explain yourself all the time." She gave a short, humorless laugh. "Turns out that's harder to find than it sounds." For a moment, the room felt smaller, the air thicker. I wanted to say something comforting, something smart, but nothing felt right. So I just sat there, letting the silence do the work. After a while, she looked up at me, not with tears, but with that calm steadiness I'd come to know. "You're quiet today," she said. "I'm listening," I said. That made her smile again, a little warmer this time. She reached for the folder beside her but stopped halfway, resting her hand near mine on the desk. Our fingers didn't touch, but the space between them felt charged, alive in the stillness. "You remind me of something I used to be," she said softly. "What's that?" "Hopeful." Her words lingered. I didn't know if it was meant as a compliment or a warning, but either way, it stayed with me long after I left the room. As I walked out, the rain had eased into a drizzle. I turned back once, she was still by the window, one hand resting lightly against the glass, watching the world blur behind it. That was the day I stopped seeing her as unreachable. She wasn't distant, just quietly protecting a part of herself she'd almost forgotten existed. And somehow, she'd let me see it. The air between us had changed after that rainy afternoon. It wasn't something either of us spoke about, but it lingered, in how our eyes met, in how our silences felt less like pauses and more like held breaths. A few days later, I found her standing by the shelves, stretching to reach a file on the top rack. I crossed the room before I could think twice. "Let me get that," I said. She turned slightly, a teasing glint in her eyes. "I'm not that fragile." "I didn't say you were." I smiled, taking the file down anyway. Our hands brushed as I passed it to her, that same quiet spark again, brief but impossible to ignore. She didn't step back this time. Instead, she looked up at me, her lips curved in a knowing half-smile. Still think you need that timeout? The words hit differently now, not playful, but laced with something warmer. Maybe, I said. Depends where it is. She held my gaze for a moment, long enough to make the room feel smaller. Then she took the file, turned away, and walked toward her desk. You'd probably get bored, she murmured. I don't think I would. The corner of her mouth lifted, though she didn't look back. Later that evening, we stayed after everyone else had gone, again. She was sitting at her desk, adjusting her glasses, a faint crease between her brows as she focused on the page. I offered to help, mostly as an excuse to stay close. She sighed, smiling without looking up. You don't take hints, do you? Not the subtle ones. That earned a quiet laugh. You're impossible. Only around you. When I leaned closer to see what she was working on, our shoulders almost touched. The faint warmth of her skin brushed against my sleeve, and I could feel my heartbeat quicken. She noticed, I knew she did, but didn't move away. For a moment, the air felt suspended, the sounds of the world fading beyond the soft ticking of the clock. Her perfume, light, clean, with a trace of something like sandalwood, filled the space between us. She turned her head slightly, her voice low. You know there's a line here, right? I do, I said quietly. I just don't know which side we're on anymore. Her eyes softened. She didn't answer, but her silence said enough. When she finally stood to leave, she rested a hand on my arm, just for a second, as if to anchor the moment. Go home, she said gently. Before we forget where the line is. But as her hand slipped away, I realized, neither of us had forgotten. We were both standing right on it, pretending not to notice how much we wanted to cross. It was a Thursday, the kind of day that drags without reason. Everyone had left early, but she stayed behind again, finishing reports in the soft hum of the evening. I told myself I was only staying to help, though even I didn't believe that anymore. Outside, the sky had turned a dusky violet, and the faint hum of rain clouds rolled somewhere far off. The room felt smaller than usual, or maybe just quieter. She sat across from me, her hair slightly undone, glasses slipping lower on her nose as she worked. There was something almost domestic about it, familiar in a way I couldn't explain. Long day, I said, mostly to fill the silence. She nodded, eyes still on the page. Feels longer when it's quiet. Maybe you just don't like being alone. She looked up then, that same subtle smirk tugging at her lips. You assume I'm not used to it. I think you've just forgotten what company feels like. That made her pause. She leaned back, studying me, and for a moment, I couldn't tell if she was amused or moved. You talk too much, she said softly. Only when I'm nervous. Are you nervous now? Her question landed with a strange weight. I didn't answer. The only sound was the faint ticking of the clock and the whisper of rain finally starting outside. She didn't look away this time, her eyes stayed on mine, steady and unreadable. Then she spoke again, barely above a whisper. You shouldn't stay late like this. I know. Then why do you? Because the room feels different when you're in it. Her breath caught, a tiny, involuntary sound. She looked down, exhaling through a faint smile that didn't reach her eyes. You don't make this easy, you know. I'm not trying to. When she stood, I thought she was leaving, but instead she moved closer, standing beside my chair. Her hand brushed the back of it, almost accidental, but not quite. I looked up. She didn't move away. You don't know what you're doing, she said quietly. Maybe not. But I know what this feels like. The room seemed to hold its breath with us. The lamplight caught the outline of her face, soft and golden, her eyes unreadable but open in a way I hadn't seen before. Then, slowly, she rested her hand on mine, not tentative, but deliberate. Her fingers were warm, her touch light yet grounding. We didn't say anything. We didn't need to. The silence between us said more than words ever could. After a while, she drew a slow breath, her thumb brushing against my hand before she let go. "You should go," she said softly. I nodded, but didn't move. Not yet. Because deep down, I knew, that small touch had changed something neither of us could take back. When I finally left, the air outside smelled like rain and memory, and I realized her voice would echo in my head long after tonight was over. The next morning felt off balance, too quiet, too bright, too normal. The kind of normal that hides something underneath. I arrived early, maybe to prove to myself that nothing had changed. But the truth is, everything had. Every sound in that room, the click of her pen, the shuffle of papers, carried a different weight now. When she walked in, she greeted me like always. Calm, professional, composed. But her eyes lingered a heartbeat longer than usual, and that single heartbeat felt louder than the rest of the morning combined. "Early again," she said. I smiled faintly. "Guess I couldn't sleep." She set her bag down carefully, her movements unhurried, deliberate, like she was measuring every gesture. "Work keeping you up?" "Something like that." Her lips curved, but her gaze slipped away. The air between us was full of the things we didn't dare say. We talked about reports, schedules, the usual small talk that now felt like acting. And yet, every time our hands passed each other, every accidental brush, every pause in her voice, it all carried that memory from last night. At one point, she reached across the desk for a file, her sleeve grazing my arm. The contact was barely there, but my breath caught before I could stop it. She froze too, then withdrew her hand a little too quickly. We both pretended not to notice. Around midday, she asked if I wanted to step out for coffee. It wasn't unusual, but the way she asked, quietly, without looking at me, made it feel like something else. We sat by the window of the cafe down the street, the sunlight warm on the table between us. She stirred her drink slowly, watching the swirl in the cup. "I keep thinking about last night," I said finally, my voice lower than I meant it to be. Her hand stopped mid-motion. For a second, she didn't look up. Then she said, almost whispering, "So do I." I waited for her to say more, but she didn't. She just sat there, staring at the light reflecting off her spoon. "I didn't mean for things to," she began, then stopped. "It's complicated." "I know," I said. "But that doesn't make it less real." Her eyes lifted to mine then, soft but guarded. "You don't know what this could cost." "Maybe not. But I know what it feels like when something finally makes sense." She exhaled, her fingers curling lightly around her cup. For a moment, it looked like she might reach for my hand again, but she didn't. Instead, she smiled that quiet, careful smile of hers. "You always make things sound simpler than they are," she said gently. "Maybe they only get complicated when we start pretending they're not real." The sunlight flickered through the glass, cutting between us like a thin, golden line. And in that fragile light, I knew, whatever this was, it wasn't something either of us could undo. Days passed, but the rhythm between us never returned to what it once was. We spoke less, but when we did, it carried more meaning, small words loaded with things we couldn't name. The tension had softened into something quieter, steadier, but no less real. One evening, she found me still working long after the others had gone. She leaned against the doorway, arms folded, her expression unreadable. "You don't listen," she said softly. "To what?" "To the part of me that told you to go home." I looked up, half smiling. "Maybe I didn't want to." She sighed, walking toward me, her steps slow but certain. "You think staying changes anything?" I shook my head. "I just didn't want last night to be the last time something felt honest." That stopped her. For a moment, she just stood there, the woman who'd always been composed, deliberate, in control, now looking at me like she didn't know which version of herself to be. "I've spent most of my life trying not to feel things that don't fit neatly into place," she said quietly. "And then you came along, joking about needing a timeout." Her voice softened, almost fond. And suddenly I couldn't stop wondering where that would be, where someone like me could actually rest. I rose from my chair, closing the space between us. "Maybe it isn't a place," I said. "Maybe it's a person." Her eyes lifted to mine. For a long time, she didn't say a word. Then she smiled, not the teasing kind, not the cautious one, but something gentler, truer. "You have no idea how unfair it is," she whispered. "Maybe it doesn't have to be." She let out a slow breath, her shoulders easing. "You really believe that, don't you?" "I think believing is all we've been doing." There was no rush, no dramatic music in the background, just quiet. The kind of quiet where two people finally stop pretending they're not standing in the same truth. She reached up, brushing her fingers lightly against my sleeve, then my wrist. Her touch was steady, calm. "You should go," she said again, but this time, her voice carried warmth instead of distance. I nodded, though neither of us moved. For a few seconds, we just stood there, her hand still resting against my arm, our eyes meeting in that suspended silence that always seemed to find us. Finally, she smiled. "I think I found that timeout after all." I returned the smile, softer than before. "And where would that be, really?" Her thumb grazed my wrist, just once. "Here," she said. "Right here." When I walked out into the evening air, it wasn't heavy anymore. The city lights shimmered against the glass, and I realized something: she wasn't a pause in my life. She was the moment everything slowed down enough to make sense. And sometimes, that's all a timeout really is, not an escape, but finding the one place where the world finally feels still.